Ladies and gentlemen, it is my responsibility to present the state's case for the penalty phase. The state of Florida is going to ask you at the conclusion of this phase that you impose the death penalty for the murders of Brandy Peters, Tamaya Peters, Tanaya Peters, Javante Segura. The evidence of the guilt phase that we went through can be considered by you as evidence in the penalty phase. And the state will primarily rely on it to prove the aggravating circumstances that are alleged to be present in this case that warrant the imposition of the death penalty for each of the murders in this case. The only additional evidence that will be introduced are complete copies of the medical examiner's reports on each of the victims. The aggravating circumstances the evidence will prove are: 1, the defendant was previously convicted of another capital felony in this case. And what that basically means in the context of this case is a contemporaneous conviction. That means, as an aggravating circumstances for Brandy Peters, you can consider the fact that at the time she was killed, that also Tamaya Peters was killed, that Tanaya Peters was killed, and that Javante Segura was killed by the defendant. And that would apply for the same for Tamaya Peters. As an aggravating circumstances in her case, you can consider that the deaths of her mother, her sister, and her brother also occurred at that time. The same for Tanaya Peters, and the same for Javante Segura. The second aggravating factor in this case is that this capital felony, this murder, was committed for the purpose of avoiding lawful arrest or effecting escape. And what that means, and the court will instruct you, is that includes the elimination of a witness. That means that, in this case, the defendant's child support didn't involve the twins. The only reason to eliminate them was because there were potential witnesses in the case. Same could apply for Javante Segura, that while he may have been the subject of the child support, it was it was Brandy Peters who was in fact the one seeking it, and that the money would have been paid for it all belong to the state. With her out of the picture, with Mr. Segura being the listed father, he would have had custody of the child and there would not be any child support. So there was no reason to kill that young man either, except to eliminate him as a witness in this case. That leads me to the third aggravating circumstances, that this crime was committed for financial gain, for some financial benefit for the defendant. The fourth, and a very weighty circumstance, would be that the crime was committed in a heinous, atrocious, or cruel way. You look to that brutality of the murders. We will be relying on the evidence that you heard from the crime scene, people who spoke, the medical examiner, and the photographs. So you've heard and seen that evidence. There will be a little bit more discussion after the judge instructs you on what the elements of what heinous and cruel are, how that ties into the evidence in this case. And we'll do that at closing. The fifth will be that this crime was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Again, the judge will give you more instructions on what those terms mean, and at closing argument, we will have a discussion as to how the evidence plays into the evidence in this case plays into that instruction, and what that means and how it applies to each of the deaths in this case. That capital felony was committed on a person less than 12 years of age. Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante were all less than 12 years of age. They were 6 years old, and 3-year-old, respectively. And that will be the final aggravating circumstance that we will be asking you to consider. At the conclusion of this penalty phase, the state will be asking you to determine that the death sentence is the appropriate sentence for the crimes Mr. Segura committed against Brandy Peters, Tamaya Peters, Tanaya Peters, and Javante Segura. Thank you.
Your Honor, the defense declines to make a statement.
All right, at this point, we'll allow the state and the defense an opportunity to present evidence with start with the state.
Your Honor, prior to, as pursuant to the stipulation, the state would introduce State's Exhibit 159, which is the complete autopsy report of Randy Peters. State's Exhibit 160, which is the complete autopsy report of Tamaya Peters. 161, which is the medical examiner's complete report of Tanaya Peters. And 162, which is the complete autopsy report of Javante Segura.
It's my understanding they'll be admitted by stipulation.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, they are admitted. Further testimony, Mr. Evans?
No, Your Honor.